On Sukkot, believers read the book of Ecclesiastes in the synagogue on the Sabbath of Chol Hamoed Sukkot. The book of Ecclesiastes is classified as a wisdom book among the 3 books in the Bible: Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Ben Sira also belongs to the Jewish wisdom books, but the sages decided not to include it in the Holy Scriptures. However, in practice, Ben Sira is very, very similar to Proverbs, almost identical. But since the one who determines its significance and meaning is not among the Holy Scriptures, it is strong, as Professor Leibowitz says. Therefore, in fact, from today's Orthodox religious perspective, the Bible is a kind of minor tool. For determining the laws and rules, the main foundation is actually the Talmud. So that's why Ben Sira wasn't included, because that's what the sages decided. Now, what is the book of Ecclesiastes, which in my eyes is an amazing book? And I wish that instead of yeshiva students spending all day splitting hairs over the foolishness of the sages, they would study a bit of Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Job, Ben Sira, and in general, the books of philosophy. From ancient Greece and even the profound ancient wisdom of Assyria, Babylon, Mesopotamia, and Canaan. Now, what truly interests me about the book of Ecclesiastes, at least for me personally, is that its author understood that our lives as human beings, our very awareness, and our deep insight are indeed a vanity of vanities. Everything, absolutely everything, is vanity. And this crucial point, to fully understand it, is, in my humble opinion, the absolute key to a person's genuine happiness. And that's what I want to talk about here. But before that, let's get to know Ecclesiastes a little. Just a small taste. And this is from the first course I took at the Open University, which is an introduction to the Bible, all about biblical criticism. And here there's a chapter on the wisdom books, which are Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Ben Sira, and they explain about Ecclesiastes. So first of all, when was Ecclesiastes written? So they say this: the latest possible date for the composition of the book of Ecclesiastes, the upper limit, meaning by when it was definitely already written. When was it already clear that the book existed? That's in the 2nd century BCE. There is already evidence that the book of Ecclesiastes existed. But that means that the book of Ecclesiastes was composed at the latest by 150 BCE, and the earliest source is actually approximately the 3rd century BCE, that is, during the Second Temple period. And I'll read you a sentence that the researchers say here. The portrayal of King Solomon as the author of the book, if it was created during the Second Temple period, of course King Solomon did not write Ecclesiastes, so the presentation of King Solomon as the author, which appears in the opening, the words of Kohelet, son of David, and later, I was king over Israel in Jerusalem, is therefore nothing but a literary fiction. First of all, the whole thing with Solomon is a literary fiction, and this was part of the culture of the ancient world, to write a book and attribute it to some ancient figure. It was part of the culture, not some blatant lie, but it was very common to attribute works to other people. After they determined the field and the time period, which is between the 3rd century BCE and the 150th century BCE, they come and bring parallels from wisdom literature of the ancient world, from the ancient Near East. So I'll read you a few examples. This is wisdom from Mesopotamia, Sumerian wisdom, Babylonian wisdom. I'll just give you a brief summary because they bring examples that are wonderful, showing one-to-one parallels, which explains that these are natural compositions of people and nations. And I'll give you an example from Ugaritic wisdom literature, where they say in Ugaritic, 2 sacrifices to Baal, Baal is the god of Canaan, 3 to the rider of the clouds, which is another Canaanite god, the rider of the clouds. From them, a sacrifice of shame, a sacrifice of strife, strife and quarrel, and a sacrifice of gossip, the essence. The same thing appears in Proverbs. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him, haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and so on and so forth. And then they also give an example from wisdom literature. Here's another compelling example for you. Let's look closely here. Yes, it's clearly written here. For the poor, death is truly better than life, with mere bread, with simple salt, with just an eye, and so on and so forth. And this is very strongly reminiscent of the profound proverbs found in the ancient book of Proverbs. Okay, so basically what Kohelet is saying, and I'll read you a verse from Kohelet that caught my eye. For the living know that they will die. In other words, a person has awareness and the ability. We actually have a very interesting trait, unlike other animals, that in our brain, which evolved over time, we have the ability to observe what we think, what we feel, and what we do. That is, while I'm talking to you, I can also observe the fact that I'm talking to you right now, and to observe myself observing while I'm talking to you. And this can go on endlessly. We have this ability built into our brain's mechanism. Everyone recognizes this when they do it. So because we have the ability to observe our actions and what's happening around us, we are aware that we are going to die. And here's the catch, and then we say, so what's the point of this whole thing anyway? If it's fleeting, like the blink of an eye, when there's a fly that lives for a day or two, what's the point for it? And that's what Kohelet also concluded. There is no meaning. And he says here in chapter 9, verse 5, for the living know that they will die. We know we're going to die, but the dead know nothing at all. Just like when people ask me what happens after death, I answer the same as before birth. How did you feel before you were born? Nothing. And after death? Nothing. And they have no more reward, for their memory is forgotten. In general, a person lives, and okay, so people remember him, but how many people does each person really know? I'm not talking about exceptional individuals like who truly shaped the laws of the world and history, but most people are remembered only by a handful of people, close family, co-workers, and acquaintances. If you count for each person, it ranges between 100 and 500 people, and you can see this by how many people you invite to your wedding. So even remembrance is eventually forgotten. And who, I don't know, my 6th generation ancestors. And most people are like that. They don't know, they are forgotten. And how Nietzsche comes and says, just as Ecclesiastes says, that in essence there is no meaning. There is no meaning. Because what advantage, he says, there is no advantage even to wisdom over foolishness. Because even gold. Now pay attention to our brain's mechanism. And what Nietzsche said is not only that there is no meaning, but that the word meaning itself has no meaning. Why? Because our brain's mechanism is constantly asking about everything. Wait, and what is the meaning? Because what is meaning? It's what is the purpose? What is the end goal? What's the point? Now let's take the atheist perspective and the religious faith-based perspective. Let's say with the atheist, you ask him, so what is the meaning? After all, you die and then there's nothing for you afterwards. So I say, really, there is no meaning. It's very simple. You go to the religious person, he imagines that there is meaning. But if he thinks about it a bit, you'll see that he also has no meaning. Because what is your meaning, you, the religious person? So he says, I'll suffer here in this world as a kind of test, in order to get a reward in the world to come. Now you ask, wait, and what is the meaning of the world to come? Oh, I'll enjoy it, I'll have fun, and what's the meaning of that? There isn't any, the mind can't comprehend meaning. So even this whole business where the wise have their crowns on their heads, or according to the Muslims that they'll receive virgins and all that, what's the meaning of that? What's the meaning of God at all? Think for a moment, what's the meaning of God? Suppose there was no God, so what? Then there would be nothing. So what's his meaning? There isn't any, the mind is incapable of understanding meaning. Because with every meaning you find, you'll always ask what the meaning of that meaning is. And that's why Nietzsche came and said there's no meaning to meaning. So this reality, this understanding that everything that happens is completely, what do you do with that? If you are vanity of vanities, everything is vanity, and there is no advantage even for the wise over the fool, nor for the rich over the poor, then what? How are we supposed to survive this life in the details? Kohelet says there is a piece of advice, or even two pieces of advice, though according to biblical scholars, the last piece of advice is a later addition. So his first piece of advice, after he says that the living know they will die and the dead know nothing, is see life with the woman whom you love. All the days of your fleeting life that he has given you. In other words, you will know that this is a fleeting life, but see life with the woman whom you love. It's simple. Fulfill and realize your natural desires. Because desire for a woman is the strongest natural desire. That's why he gave the example. See life with the woman. He saw that this is actually symbolic of all the natural desires that are internal to us. Even though we are aware that it has passed. His second suggestion, which is actually a later addition to the book of Ecclesiastes, because it's apparently an addition by someone more religious, he says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole of man. So keep the commandments. Now, keeping the commandments means without the thesis of enjoying life with a happy woman and all that, because you are essentially suppressing your desire for the woman. And in fact, you are not living a natural life, but rather fulfilling external commandments that are imposed on you, and most people do them out of fear, because this is the whole of man. Now, the atheist admits that there is no meaning to this miserable life, even though he lives a life with a woman and enjoys all his desires. But the one who keeps the commandments, he never once asked himself, wait, and what is your meaning? He will always ask the atheist what the meaning is, but he never asks himself. So religious folks, ask yourselves, what is the meaning of keeping the commandments? What is the afterlife? And what is the meaning of the afterlife? And what if you come and arrive and they tell me that a person ascends from level to level, let's say on the 10th level, then there will be meaning on the 9th level until he reaches God. But even God has no meaning. What is the meaning of God? Does God have meaning? There, at the very top, there is no meaning. The mind is incapable of understanding meaning. So it turns out that if we weigh on the scales the atheist, who is aware of the futility of life and says there is no meaning, he lives out his natural desires, versus the religious person who imagines meaning because he simply becomes repressed and turns into a fool in the process, becomes dull and doesn't stop to think for a moment. What is the meaning of God? What is the meaning of existence? Even that is meaningless. And so he basically suffers in this corridor, which is the comic tragedy, especially when they come and suffer and observe the nonsense and foolishness of the sages, as I show in my videos. And here I kind of want to point out, because people often ask me, Yaron, what's your alternative to religion? Religion is often perceived as a kind of spiritual morphine, an opiate for the masses, providing a temporary solace. And what opium do you give to the masses? And I believe that we are already at an advanced stage of humanity. That we don't need to give opium. We don't need to give drugs to the masses. I think we're going through a process of maturing, and this maturity, this psychological maturity, can contain the harsh reality, just as the Stoics managed to do more than 2,000 years ago, that there is no meaning. And someone who accepts the real reality and doesn't imagine fantasies and stops in his thoughts and thinks and imagines that if he puts on tefillin, then he has meaning. What is the meaning of tefillin? What? That you'll get the world to come? So what is the meaning of the world to come? Oh, that you'll get closer to God, but what is the meaning of God? There is no meaning to God. So the moment a person accepts this reality and is at peace with it, because there's nothing you can do about it, you understand that this is life, but then you live with a woman you love, meaning you fulfill your desires. That is the greatest wealth I know and have experienced in my short life, which passes like a fleeting shadow. And that's my alternative. My alternative is that everyone should go through a process, a reflection, because we have the ability to observe the world and understand that in the end, no one really offers true meaning because there is no meaning to meaning. To accept this harsh reality with a hug and with love because you have nothing else but this mirror-like reality, and to fulfill your desires and see life with the woman you love.